show Isaiah 53 to a Jew, have them read Isaiah 53, they will say, oh, you must be reading out of the New Testament.
Because it doesn't sound like the Tanakh.
You get your own Tanakh, you read Isaiah 53, start at Isaiah 52, verse 13. They read it out of their own Tanakh, and they are floored.
Well, it sounded like he was getting pierced to the cross or something.
And this is 700 years before Jesus is born.
Right.
When you go to a synagogue, they will read a portion from the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. They cover the entire Tanakh, but there's a portion they skip. They don't read Isaiah 52, verse 13, through the end of Isaiah 53. To this day, in every synagogue, they don't read that portion. And that's why when a Jew reads that portion, they are floored.
Punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed.
By his wounds we are healed. So where is this from? The Old Testament or the New Testament?
Let me show you how that describes why those of us who have deconstructed. So he is absolutely correct that most Jews have never read Isaiah 53. It is not something that the synagogues will read during the time frame that they read the Tanakh. I think it's called a Haftarah. But they will skip most of 52, all of 53, and resume back at 54. So, of course, when you approach a person who is a regular Jewish believer, someone who has never read their book, they will then not understand Isaiah 53. It will be foreign to them. Something they've never heard of. It's never been taught in the synagogue. It's never been taught at home. It's never been taught to them. They've never read it. And it demonstrates that they've never actually read their book in order to see Isaiah 53 in its full context. They simply just never read it. Now, because they have heard of Christianity, the only thing familiar to them initially is the ideas of Jesus. And so they become floored. Sounds like something out of the New Testament. It doesn't sound like the Tanakh at all. Of course this happens. But this also happens in Christianity. Read to a Christian the first time Leviticus 25, 44, and 40, 44, 45, and 46. Those verses. They will be floored. They will try to obfuscate because it is their God endorsing the chattel slavery that has happened all over the world throughout time. Have a Christian read Numbers 31. And when they see that this God says to kill all the fighting men, kill all the old men, kill all the women who have known a man, kill all the baby boys. But take for yourselves the little girls who have not known a man and make them your wives. They are floored and therefore have to go out and look for other things to justify this situation of taking little baby girls who have never known a man and basically making them sex slave wives. When it justifies the chattel slavery that happened in Americas, the chattel slavery that happened in Europe, that happened during the Roman Empire, during every empire, the chattel slavery that happened all over the world, when it's this God justifying it, they're floored. So Isaiah 53, why are they floored? Did the rabbis in the 17th century stop teaching Isaiah 53 because it was confusing and a bunch of Jewish people into believing in Jesus? That is what they are insinuating, that they stopped teaching Isaiah 53 because this made them say that Jesus must have been the Messiah. And me as a Jewish born person, my family has missed it for generations. I mean, it talks of a suffering servant. It says that he will not be a handsome man, that the mankind will reject him and no one will like him, and that he will be bruised and beaten. But by his stripes we will be healed, and he will redeem Israel. To them, that sounds like Jesus. And to Christians, it sounds like Jesus. And we'll get to why it sounds like Jesus in a minute. But let's look at it for what it is. When you actually read Isaiah 53, put it in its historical context of the time frame that it was penned, which would be around 700. Around 700 BCE, this is the time frame that the Assyrian Empire had conquered all of northern Israel except for Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was paying tribute to Sennacherib. This is the time frame they conquered all of Judea and the southern kingdom of Judah. and they had conquered the northern portions of, all the way down to the northern portions of Egypt. So the Assyrian Empire had conquered all the Israelite people except for the city of Jerusalem. Sennacherib had taken the best, the brightest out of Israel and brought them into to Nineveh, to the Assyrian Empire's capital. They saw themselves as being bruised and beaten. They saw themselves as the suffering sons of God. This was repeated within the Babylonian captivity. And so Isaiah 53 struck a chord with them. But for hundreds and hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years, it was an argument. There was a consistent argument. You see, initially, there's not an argument. The overwhelming majority thought that it was speaking of Israel as a nation. The overwhelming argument was that there was going to rise one who would conquer the Assyrian Empire. They would free Israel from the Assyrian Empire. They was expecting a Messiah to happen and come at that time frame. During the time frame of the Babylonian captivity, they understood that the suffering servant was Israel, but also there would come one that would militarily avenge their captivity and bring them out of the Babylonian captivity. But they didn't get one. They didn't see Darius as being that person because Israel was still a vassal state to the Persian Empire. They didn't see Alexander as being that person. They were still conquered by the Greeks. They didn't see Caesar as that person because they were still being conquered by the Romans. At all times, they were being conquered. For a time, they thought maybe possibly the Hasmonean dynasty might have been the servant that they were speaking of in Isaiah 53. But after not seeing that and being conquered for so long, even old Christian fathers like Origen in 248 CE would write that Israel as a country was the suffering servant because it had been brutalized and beaten at the hands of Gentiles and have suffered in silence. This argument continued, but as we progressed into the Roman Empire being disbanded, the diaspora of Israel being separated, the Omar coming in and taking over Judea and becoming, and the Ottomans and the Arabs reigning over Israel, they would not see Omar as the suffering servant. So the body became the suffering servant, the nation of Israel. But then argument begins to come up. The argument that the Jewish people were having was not in consideration with Christianity. The argument was a future Messiah. Is it speaking of a future Messiah? Was it talking about Mesha ben Joseph, who was seen as a John the Baptist sort, who was bruised and beaten and brutalized before being redeemed before he passed away? Was it Mesha ben David? Who was it? They were pointing in different directions as far as different Jewish leaders who had came up and different bodies of the Israelite people. That was the argument. It had nothing to do with Christianity, although some remnant may have had that argument, but there is no data that will support that. Nothing that I have found, put it that way. So this argument that they teach it so that people don't realize it was Jesus. No. There has been, Sorberg wrote this article, this book about it. And in his book, he claimed to defeat the argument that Raphael Levy proposed in the 17th century when he chronicled why they were going to stop teaching this and gave his 12 reasons, some valid, some a little weak. But this just demonstrates how people don't read their own book, and that the leadership can make them believe and say whatever they desire for them to believe and say, because the regular Christian will see this as the Jews really know who Jesus was, but they just don't want to admit it. The Jews will look at it and say, well, there was too many arguments and we've never read this and they've never taught us this. So maybe it is, maybe it's not. It just shows people don't read. They just don't.